Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. And I just wanted to say, just again, appreciate this is the last meeting for this group, and I appreciate everybody's involvement and input in it. It has been very, very helpful. I think we have a workable path forward with this draft report, and today is dedicated solely to reviewing the report. So we probably won't take the whole time, allotted time till noon, but we'll see. So anyway, thanks for helping out with this.
Okay, so what I'd like to do today is walk through portions of the report, starting with the recommendations, because that's likely to take the most time, then to go to the other issues section, and then go back to any of the other material in the report that folks feel a need to discuss. I wanted to mention that Don Kleiner, Nancy Sfera, and Patrick Strauch are unable to be at the meeting today, but they've all indicated their support for the report. So if everyone's okay with my suggestion, I will start with the recommendations that are at the bottom of the third page and continue on to the fourth page of the report. So the first recommendation is regarding MFS, Maine Municipal, and partner organizations to coordinate a regular and continued education and outreach effort, et cetera, et cetera. And so this would be a coordinated effort to reach out to communities and help them comply with the process, provide them good information about forest management and so on. Any comments? Okay, we're good there. Moving on to number 2 is to clarify in statute what constitutes a forestry ordinance that requires Maine Forest Service review. Heather, you got your hand up. Heather? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So sorry about that. Okay, so I just wondered if in that first one, and if there could be something in there. I think it could go a long way to elevating, to sort of addressing some of the concerns that people have. If there could be a mention of low impact forestry policies, and maybe you're not amenable to that specific term, but just to acknowledge that that part of the outreach and education would be to elevate the most environmentally friendly approach to forestry. If there could be a clause, or even even added to one of the sentences, I think that's certainly something that, if there is legislation that comes forward, something that we would be advocating for is just really elevating the, working with communities to manage our forest resources in the context of our Maine Won't Wait climate action plan. Obviously, you wouldn't get into that level of detail, but I think that could be helpful.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Heather, just to would it be, we kind of want to keep this somewhat broad, would saying inherently to promote sound forest practices, is that enough of a statement?
Greg?
Yeah, on Raymond, in the comprehensive plan, we simply put in encourage property owners to enroll their land in tree growth taxation to make it more affordable and more attractive. And you also get the management plan written. That may be a simple solution to Heather's concern.
Yeah, I guess, I'm sorry, I'm just going back and forth on my screen here and hiding the controls. But I guess I just wonder, and sorry, somebody else had their hand up, but could I just get back to this question? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, like, what prompted this thought was in recommendation 1C2. It just kind of harkened back for me to the some of the conversations I've heard about right to farm, where people who raise concerns say, you know, too bad, that's what farming looks like, and the conversation ends there, and there's tension, and it's not really resolving anything. So I just feel like, you know, sound forest management. I mean, it's not a secret that we've raised concerns about, you know, acceptable, what is deemed sound forest management, outcome-based forestry that is, you know, makes people feel good, but we know that there are a lot of practices that could be improved. And so I just wonder if the sentiment of we're recognizing that we can always improve, and I mean, it might be helpful just for, you know, for the Bureau of Forestry to be able to say we're always striving to improve, and that we're not being defensive about what we do now, that there's always room for improvement, and we're going to work together to help communities understand that.
Thank you. Tom, you had your hand up first, and then Rebecca.
Thanks, Don. I think we should look at what the intent of the purpose of the statute is. The purpose of the statute is not, this is not a Forest Practices Act. This is the state has a Forest Practices Act, and it says if you want to go beyond that in a local ordinance, you need to follow all these steps. So it isn't necessarily, well, I don't argue that we can improve forestry. I'm not sure that this is about a municipality that decides it wants to do something, to consult with the Forest Service and involve a forester and make sure anything they develop is sound. And I don't think it's the job of the Forest Service to then go out to every municipality and talk to them about what the Forest Service believes is the right way to write an ordinance. Because the idea was this was supposed to limit ordinances, not encourage ordinances. And that's my concern.
Thanks, Tom. Heather? I'm sorry, Rebecca?
Thanks, Don. Just a couple of things. I think this might be a place where there can be some outreach, or at least some conversation about the communities that have higher regulatory standards, and maybe would answer some of Heather's stuff. But, you know, I would agree that there does need to be a statewide message on that, and that tends to be a place that is better suited for regulation, because at least within those regulated communities, we have issues with the same low impact development. There's not always a choice for some communities, particularly those 30 communities, to adopt ordinances that are more stringent. There's a drive. So there needs to be that interdepartment communication piece that I think could be part of the outreach. DEP has a different set of standards for low impact development and is forcing municipalities to adopt those ordinances for low impact development. And no one really can agree as to what that is. And there's some confusion about what low impact development is. And I think that there's probably the same kind of confusion with low impact forestry and what that means depending upon where it's located. So if you just put in there that there's going to be some sort of outreach and alignment to the regulated communities in understanding how those might align with their permit requirements, I think that low impact development naturally becomes part of that conversation, and therefore low impact forestry can also be explored through that lens. But I think that's actually more of an industry conversation than a community conversation. I don't know that communities are best suited to understand or to make those decisions as to what low impact forestry is. I think that the industry needs to be part of that conversation. And then it needs to be a state accepted standard, because that's where it falls onto the community, is where there is this intersection of regulation, regulatory need, and miscommunication. I think part of the reason those regulated communities have those ordinances is because there isn't a statewide desire to apply them uniformly across, and they are dealing with the mitigation, and arguably there could be protection activity to prevent more water quality issues. So I think that it just might be the need in this section to actually put in the connection with other departments and other regulatory requirements.
Thank you. Paul, you got your hand up. Sorry.
Yep, just a quick question, Don. I was on that number 1C, section C. I assume that's the department will continue to offer outreach to the public regarding sound management and what timber harvest should entail. I don't think it's exclusive to the department. Okay. Rebecca, is that the section where you're talking about adding a piece related to other regulatory, reaching out between agencies? Is that where you were talking about? I'm just confused.
Yeah, I think that's the side there in terms of continue to offer outreach to the public regarding. I think the outreach part also needs to not necessarily be with municipalities, but to be interdepartmental to understand where the pressures for ordinance adoption are, and understanding the regulatory environment is different in some communities where those particular ordinances have been adopted in some cases with regard to DEP pressures. So I think that there's interdepartmental outreach, but I think that the voice that gets heard most consistently at the municipal level is what gets responded to. So if DEP is continually reaching out to municipalities, then DEP's requirements are the ones that float to the top. There hasn't necessarily maybe been any sort of engagement. I don't know if there has been in terms of the regulated communities, but that's what I'm thinking in terms of adding that outreach piece in there under the C. I think that's both public as well as internal.
I think that's I like that, Don, reaching the departments, talking a little bit more between each other on some of this stuff. And I like in B where it references the comprehensive plan for the municipality. Mm-hmm. After just going through that process in New Gloucester, ours has not been accepted yet, but after going through that process, a lot of effort was put into that comprehensive plan, especially related to maintaining New Gloucester's rural character, which includes farming and forestry. So a lot of effort was put into that, and referencing that comprehensive plan, I think I like that. And that's my only comments on that section. Thanks, Don.
Yep. Thank you. Tom.
I think some of this conversation might be confusing development and forest management here, and I do agree it was later discussed here, but I mean I'm looking to see, is DEP telling municipalities they have to regulate forest management on woodlots? Is that, or is it about development and and I don't know if Rebecca, that's, excuse me, for you or whatever, but I mean, is there a distinction there? Because I wasn't aware that they were trying to regulate, get municipalities to pass ordinance regarding forest management, what we call forest management activities.
Tom, I can answer that a little bit. It's a federal requirement, and DEP has developed a permit to meet the federal clean water standards, and it only applies in specific communities. Right now, that's 30 of them. The feds are now reviewing how that community decision as to whether or not they have to meet these requirements, how they measure that. So there are likely to be in the future more communities that get swept up into that. And some of them are rural communities. Some of them are more urbanized communities, but there are like VZ, for instance, is a regulated community, as is Bangor and Hamden. And where there is a water buffer for what has been described as an urban impaired or endangered stream, there is municipal responsibility even within the waters of the state to meet a TMDL for that. Sometimes they're not very clear. However, a big portion of that is to adopt local ordinances that are more stringent than state standards. And that has to do with setbacks. It has to do with review. So for instance, if there's an acre of disturbed soil, for road building to get into an area that happens to be within that catchment or happens to have some sort of connection with a conveyance that goes into one of these areas, there would be a greater standard within that community. And that is part of the federal permit process, and it's part, and DEP has just written those rules. So it might not apply. There might not be forestry lands that are in there, but Cumberland is one of those areas that is also a regulated community. And I think I had sent out a list to everyone just to flag those. There may be no forest lands within that catchment. However, there is that local requirement for that municipality to adhere to their federal permit that they have to have those greater standards and they have to adopt those ordinances. It's not only for development, it's just for disturbed soils and any sort of runoff that goes into the conveyances, and generally gets framed in the terms of development. And there are forestry practices such as pulling out stumps and those types of things, or cutting undergrowth that isn't necessarily, would not be flagged, but the low impact forestry piece would play into that. So there may be a low impact forestry drive if there were such areas in those particular communities, but it does not necessarily mean that it's automatically part, but cutting is agnostic in terms of whether or not it's forestry or whether it's clearing for development in most of those places as well.
There are a number of exemptions in the statute for under NERPA and things for forestry, including forestry roads and things like that. Be interesting if the Forest Service could connect with DEP and see if there is an overlap between. Don, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
Don.
No, finish your sentence, please.
Because the ordinance that I'm familiar with, forestry ordinances, are pretty comprehensive, and they're specifically talking about what I would call forest management. And I think that's the intent of the ones that I have seen, but we clearly ought to separate out what we believe is forest management from other activities that involve the cutting of trees and disturbing of soil. So
yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily, it's not NERPA, it's stormwater, which is a separate entity.
Yeah. Let me address this. The stormwater business is covered under the Clean Water Act, and that's the federal law. And silvicultural activities, including land management roads, are exempt from permitting requirements under the Clean Water Act explicitly. And there's been a Supreme Court decision in the last 5 years on that matter. States are required to develop and monitor the implementation of forestry best management practices, which we've done. We've been doing it for a long time. We have a very high rate of implementation and effectiveness. Water crossings for land management roads and skid trails do require permits, and Maine Forest Service does this by delegation from the DEP in law. We also regulate the timber harvesting in shoreland areas. Towns can be stricter. That's given. and they're on their own for administration and enforcement. And our regulations explicitly exclude timber harvesting in smaller areas, parcels less than 2 acres, and clearing for development. So, maybe we need to clarify this difference between clearing for development and legitimate timber harvesting. But silviculture activities are exempt from these permitting requirements, even in these MS4 watersheds.
Yeah, I think the current permit says there are certain activities, however, soil disturbance and road building is not necessarily if it disturbs more than 1 acre. I think that's what's in the current permit. So if there is some sort of connection that could be made, that might be valid, but they just finished editing it.
Right. No, I've looked through that, but the issue still goes back to, so land management roads for forestry and agricultural purposes are exempt from permitting under the Clean Water Act. Paul, you got your hand up?
Yeah, Don, this exact discussion is what should be part of the outreach, because this is where the municipalities are confused. I understand. I agree with what everybody here has said, but as part of that education piece, this has to be part of it, because this question has come up, Don, in those towns that Rebecca sent around. I actually represent some of those towns as a forester, and landings have come up as questionable about that, log landings, all of that stuff. So I think part of the outreach, if we can have a discussion about what you and Rebecca were just discussing with the municipalities and DEP behind, being involved as well, it prevents, it is potentially going to educate and prevent what we're doing here today. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the other thing, yesterday I looked at the list that Rebecca sent out and looked at what these towns have done for shoreline zoning. And of the 30 towns, 21 of them have chosen either option 1 or option 2, meaning that they either have repealed their forestry standards. That's 18 of them, and 3 have chosen to incorporate our standards into their existing ordinances. The other 9 towns, 7 of them are option 3, meaning they're on their own. They can do whatever they want. And 2 towns have taken no action in all these years. So they're living under their existing ordinances and again on their own.
And I think as part of that outreach, Don, that would be something that would be part of it, because as
Yep.
you know, the municipalities that think they have adopted statewide standards, which have not adopted statewide standards legally, are existing. They
Yes.
truly believe they are statewide standards towns, but they're not because they haven't done it correctly. And I think that could be part of that outreach as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
Before we go live on statewide standards, we're going to reach out to all the towns
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
to say, you said you were this back in 2013. Do you agree with this? And if they don't, then we'll figure it out.
Perfect.
Rebecca?
Thank you.
Yeah, Paul, thank you for synthesizing what's in my head, and then I was having a hard time describing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. But I also think it's part of the public outreach, because those municipalities, particularly in those communities, are constantly challenged by environmental groups for not enforcing or not doing something, because there is this misunderstanding. If it's an acre of disturbed soil, and then you have competing interests, whether or not you have that, the activity, who's doing that activity, seems to be a slight nuance. They see it as a failure of a permit, which just means that they are spending a lot of time trying to get attorneys to sort out through this. And if there could be some sort of real distinct clarity, it's going to help the public as well as those municipalities understand their obligations, because essentially they just don't want to be challenged. They want to be doing the right work, and there's a big push out there to challenge these communities on these issues as well.
Thank you. I think we got the message on this one. Okay, moving on to item number 2, clarifying statute, what constitutes a forestry ordinance that requires Maine Forest Service review. Okay. Number 2, number 3, make a clearer distinction in statute between timber harvesting activities and clearing for development. And, as I said before, we have exemptions written into our rules that, not exemptions, but that clearing for development activities must comply with the development clearing standards and not the timber harvesting standards. We also have something of a recapture provision in our shoreline zoning standards for land that changes use within 5 years post-harvest. And maybe that could be tweaked a little bit. Heather, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I just I'm fine with 3. I just had a quick question about 2 and wondered do you have do you have something in mind specifically, like a sentence or bullet points about what you would offer?
Yeah, I think it would probably be following the definition of timber harvesting activities, which is timber harvesting, the construction and maintenance of roads used primarily for timber harvesting, the mining of gravel used for the construction and maintenance of roads used primarily for timber harvesting, and other activities conducted to facilitate timber harvesting. So that would not include pre-commercial work such as thinning, planting, spraying herbicides, and so on. Okay, so are we all set on number 3? Okay, moving on to number 4. Establish in statute a process for either a municipality to certify to Maine Forest Service that it has followed the process in adoption of an ordinance, or for MFS to certify that a municipality has followed the process and the ordinance is approved. B would be kind of like what DEP does with shoreline zoning ordinances now. Any comments, any preferences? Rebecca?
I guess my only question is, do you think you do not currently have that authority and that's why you would need that process in statute?
Yeah, because the law just says the town has to follow this process, but here we are, and this is why we're talking about this issue, because we don't know who's done what. Okay, any other comments on number 4? Moving on, number 5, establish a new deadline in statute for municipalities with current forestry ordinances, regardless of the date of adoption, regardless of whether they follow the process, to make all definitions consistent with definitions in law or Maine Forest Service rule by a date certain, or the ordinance is void. Some variation of this already exists in law. Towns were required back in whatever year it was, 99, to come into compliance with their definitions by 2000. Again, we have no idea of whether and how that's been done. And we put the deadline out there, 2025. That's pretty far out there. Plenty of time to do something within several town meeting cycles. Heather?
Yeah, I just wondered if you said you have no idea, but didn't you also say that there are some municipalities that you have worked with? And I just wonder if if you need to put towns that have been in compliance that you have worked with to put them through this process again, or could it just a checklist? I don't know, just.
Yeah, most of these, there's only like 14 towns. And many of them ended up not doing anything with a local ordinance. But we can certainly exempt any town that has already followed the process.
That's what I was thinking. Just
Yeah.
if there's some exemption, that would be good.
Yep. Let me make a note. Tom.
Don, you wouldn't want to put any, compliant through a process, but you'd want to make sure that they hadn't somehow amended their ordinance since you worked with them too. So I don't
Yeah.
think there's any harm in, going back to them and making you say, is this what is this your current? Because I do have a suggestion at the end of an additional thing I think we should add to this.
Okay.
And let me bring it up now while I think there should be an official list. It would be really helpful to everybody, I think, if there was a list. And since they have to submit it to the Forest Service, and you have the ability to say whether this is compliant, I think the Forest Service should be the keeper of the a list. I don't think that's a burden on municipalities because they have to give it to you anyway. And if a municipality didn't, adopted an ordinance in the future but didn't consult with you, then it wouldn't be on the official list. I think that would be helpful to everybody. So anybody working in multiple towns or only could go to, instead of trying to find it on the town website or something, or might not even be there, it would be up on your site. So that's a addition that I think should be considered as part of your report. I'm not trying to take anything away from the municipality. I'm just trying to make it this is the place you can go to find out.
Gotcha. Rebecca.
I just want to let Tom know that I totally agree. This is what happens now with pesticides.
Wait a minute. Rebecca,
This is what happens with
I withdraw my
pesticides.
recommendation. This used to happen with Jeff every once in a while, and we'd look at each other like, "You're kidding me? What do you know that I don't know?"
No, I think
All
a
right.
centralized list where operators can go is absolutely crucial to this, because that's what happens with pesticides now. It is at least a central pot where someone can go and say, look, here's the ordinance, it's there. And it also gives that municipality the ability to be like, look, you're supposed to be working with these guys, it's right there.
It's right
So
there.
it's the same thing with pesticides, and yeah, I would totally agree.
Well, this is a historical moment, so okay.
Don't get used to it.
I will not.
Oh dear. Thank you. Okay, so any other comments on recommendation 5? Moving on to 6. Municipalities with current ordinances adopted on or after September 1st, 1990 that have not followed the process have until the 30th of June, 2023 to submit the ordinance to Maine Forest Service for review and comment and otherwise follow the process. And they need to complete the process by June 30th of 2025. And if they don't, then those ordinances, if we know about them, the ordinances would become void. Is that enough time, Rebecca?
I'm just trying to think about the timeline. I mean, submission 2023, it doesn't seem like it should be a problem. I'm just wondering with change, with turnover, if they would know when that ordinance was adopted. But I don't think it would be a problem. I guess, is there going to be a deadline for the review to get back to them?
Yeah, if I,
This
I'm going to assume that there's not a huge number out there that we've got some of these ordinances on file already because we found out about them. But, we can probably complete this in a timely manner and give towns enough, 1 or 2 town meeting cycles to get through it. We could
Well, I think
certainly
they're
push it
also-
out another year.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is that there needs to be an appropriation for that ordinance review, for the legal piece of the ordinance review. Those towns are going to want to consult their legal teams, and then that requires an appropriation from a budget cycle. So I don't know if you want to add another, maybe add one more extra.
Yep. Yep. That's easy. Any other comments on number 6?
Well, Don, do they?
Yes.
So if I read this right, they just have till 2023 to submit it to you. So you're giving them a year and a half to simply even submit it, right?
Correct.
So there's nothing that will prevent them from submitting it and doing the process. I mean, they don't have to wait a year and a half. If they submit it to you, if they submit it to you in April this year, you're gonna review it immediately, right?
Yep.
So you're gonna. You're asking them to submit what they currently have, right?
Yes. Yes.
Not right, and then and most of them will say we don't have any.
Right.
The few that do, ideally, would submit to you early on, and then you can do the review, and that still gives them till 2025 to get in compliance, right?
Yep.
So they would still give them potentially 3 years.
Yeah. Well, and we also have a list of, the ones that we know about, the 20 some odd towns that we can reach out to
That have
quickly.
them.
Yep.
Because if this was going to go, there's no reason you wouldn't have to wait until the law became effective. You could simply say the law is going in. If this were to pass, you don't have to wait for it to be enacted. You could say the law is going into effect. So if you have your ordinance, send it to the Forest Service, right?
Yep.
Even before the law went into effect, because it doesn't. I'm just trying to say 2005 is still quite a ways out. I mean, I think we could probably get most of them done by then. I can say that because I don't have to do any of this, but I understand. But
I can't wait till you run for office. I think.
no, the other part of it, from a municipal point of view, these are theoretically not legally adopted ordinances. So would you really want a municipality to have an ordinance out there that is not legal and keep it in place for 3 or 4 more years? Because wouldn't you want to make the municipalities come in compliance as soon as they can, because it reduces their liability, doesn't it, if they have an illegal ordinance?
I think it's the adoption of the ordinance, so the writing and creation or amending of that ordinance that requires the legal review, and then it requires a legislative body response. And if there's also going to be a consultation with the forester, if there is a substantial amendment, that's what I'm talking about. I don't want them to be in the process of doing that and have their. I think that you could argue that it's not in effect already.
Okay.
I think that you could already argue that, but in terms of it being null and void, if you're going to give them a time limit, then you want to give them a time limit that allows them to actually either adopt, amend, or get rid of it, and allows them the space if there is that comprehensive review that's necessary to go through both, probably 2, I would say 2 at least cycles. So 3 may be fine, especially if they get it in soon.
To me, it's not a to die for issue. I was trying to make it as quickly as possible so that people don't put it off, because landowners are subject to the statute, will feel they're subject to an ordinance that may or may not be legally adopted, and then a municipality is working with an ordinance that may or may not. You're going to know right off. You're going to know when they submit that to you, Don, whether they've done. If they haven't consulted with you and you have it, they have not followed the process.
Correct.
So there's no reason to wait, but they may have to decide they may want to jettison it. Okay.
And that may be the result. And
yeah, that may be.
The problem is, like, in order to get rid of that, it's not the municipality, it's the community.
Right, I understand.
And they're the ones that have to approve and can still deny. So there is some public outreach that needs to happen there for understanding as to why these are important, because you have to convince the town to vote and support it.
Right.
It's necessarily just town hall.
I think most towns will probably move as quickly as hopefully as they can, because it's to their benefit. Particularly if the Forest Service comes back and says this is not legally adopted. Okay, enough.
So where are we? Are we okay with 2024, 2026, or do we keep the original?
I'll
I think
agree with
I think
Rebecca.
2023.
I'll agree with Rebecca.
All right, I'm going to write that down. And I won't get used to it. 2023, 2026, just in case
Okay.
you have a town that, you know, is somehow in transition and waits until that end, then they have at least the third cycle.
Okay.
And
Sounds
it may
good.
be completely.
Don, just from the one municipal comment, I agree with Rebecca and Tom. Tom, I agree with you about the accelerated, but from the municipal standpoint right now, if we go to town meeting and something happens at town meeting and whatever the recommendation of the municipality is to repeal a timber harvesting ordinance and it doesn't get done at town meeting, it's another year before it comes back to town meeting. And, you know, I think you've got to educate the public in the municipality a little bit to why they shouldn't have a timber harvesting ordinance. But ultimately, it comes down to town meeting vote. And if they don't vote accordingly, then we have another year right there. And that's just from that standpoint of the municipality that I work in. And I will say this right now, that the LMPC committee in my town is literally swamped right now in marijuana. Okay, so they are just buried right now. So that's another thing that each of these municipalities is working on steady right now, and it's going to take some time. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we have one of those interesting moments when we have kumbaya between MMA and Mainwood landowners. I think we should celebrate that and move on to number 7, which is establish in statute a requirement that any ordinance restricting timber harvesting activities must be consistent with policies adopted in a state certified comprehensive plan. Heather.
So forgive my lack of civic understanding here, but I just wanted to check about towns that hadn't yet adopted a comp plan. What happens?
Is there a town that has not adopted a comp plan? Oh my word.
Comprehensive plans are extremely complex
Yes.
processes, and there are many towns that simply do not have the capacity or the volunteers, I guess, to undertake that. And then again, it has to get approved by the body. So there are some towns that have gone through that entire process and not had the comprehensive plan accepted. And they're still lingering out there, and there's less resources for them now without that state planning office piece. And now there is an additional review and need for them to go through this process again. That's looming and has been backed up. So I think that they probably don't have an ordinance either. That would be my guess.
Is there a way to rephrase that or put in a clause that just says to ensure that ordinances are not in conflict with comprehensive plans if the municipality has one, or something along those lines?
Yeah. Yep.
I would agree with that, Don. We're
Yep.
still waiting on approval of ours, our newest one. It's been quite a bit of back and forth.
Yep. All right. I can, I'll make some changes there. That's good.
Don, just have a quick question for Rebecca. What percentage would you say, just off the top of your head, does not have a comprehensive plan? No.
I can't even make a
Okay.
guess. I just know that there are a number of communities, mostly extremely rural and extremely resource starved, but
Sure.
that's generally the way it goes. Actually, if you look at the map that Judy East did in terms of planning assistance, that's probably a good indicator of where the communities are that don't have these comprehensive plans as well.
Patty, I've got a list of the towns that have currently reviewed and approved plans. It's definitely not 450 something.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, last call for comments on the recommendations. And Tom, I noted your point about adding something. Okay, I just wanted to briefly touch on the treatment of the other issues that we did not address through this process, and just to see if anybody has any concerns, issues, comments on these 4 items, which are unreasonable permit fees, frivolous lawsuits, time of day issues, and road issues. Heather.
Sorry to be like Hermione
It's okay.
here, but I just wondered if, you know, I kind of feel like, I mean, we didn't go into like deep discussion or make recommendations about them, but I think it's a little bit, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that that we didn't have time to discuss them. My sense, the way I heard it, was that these would not necessarily be necessary or welcome things to incorporate into this exercise, and that they could be addressed through the outreach and education. And we've discussed examples where, you know, that has already taken place, I think. So I guess I just felt like, you know, I just have a different perspective to this whole process. So that's why it kind of struck me as, you know, I'm maybe being a little sensitive about the way that these things are being framed. But, you know, I think the way it's presented suggests that these are important things that we need to come back to and provide legislation for. And I guess I wouldn't agree with that. So.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't watching how hands went up, so I'm just going to go with Rebecca first.
Thanks, Don. Heather, I agree. There could be some wordsmithing on this particular point, because I don't think it's necessarily that we didn't have time. I think that the issues are identified, but they require a much more systematic, complex, multi-stakeholder review that's outside the scope of, and probably the enforcement ability for the department to address these issues. And they involve a number of other intersecting, I think, committees as well as departments. So there are things that may have been raised as issues, but are definitely beyond, I think, the scope of this particular group to address holistically without more stakeholders at the table.
Paul and then Tom.
Thanks, Don. I just want to comment on some of the number 1 unreasonable permit fees, Don. I'm hoping that gets addressed when you go to look at ordinances, and when the municipalities start to submit their ordinances, if they have unreasonable fees about forestry permits. I'm hoping that'll be some of that will be addressed in that, because $1,000 to pick up storm damage doesn't encourage long-term forest management in Maine. Number 2, penalties for frivolous lawsuits, I think actually might be a topic of separate legislation, similar to the IF&W's protection for hunters and fishermen. When they're in legally hunting and fishing, they cannot be harassed. So it's the same way. And if anybody out here has involved in timber harvesting or cutting wood, that seems to be getting worse every day. the amount of people that are upset that you even cut a tree. So anyway, I think that that is a legitimate, they are both very legitimate in my opinion. And I think maybe separate legislation may be required. I should have the right to practice forestry without being harassed on my land, just as a hunter has the right to hunt without being harassed in the woods. And also the fees, I think education is part of it, but I think what needs to happen is hopefully this will get cleaned up when the municipalities start to turn in the ordinances that aren't legitimate ordinances. Thank you.
Tom, and then Rebecca again.
On that one, on the frivolous lawsuits, I'm not sure anybody has standing to bring a suit against a landowner, do they? Who would have standing? Member of the public can't bring a lawsuit against a landowner who's harvesting, can they? As long as, I mean, I'm not sure the standing exists, does it? I don't know. But, and then obviously if someone's on their land, you know, they must leave or it's trespass and they can be removed very easily by any law enforcement officer. So I think that's some of that's an educational issue, and I agree that doesn't belong. I do agree that the wording makes it sound like these are issues that need to further, that really need an answer, but we didn't have time. I believe I agree with Heather on that kind of comment, but I'm not sure how to phrase that. So these are other issues that we discussed, but you know, we didn't come to any kind of conclusion on. I do think you might want to look at reasonable fees as part of the of something that, you know, that is a requirement of the ordinance. And I don't know how, you know, I don't know where you would how you would define it, because a municipality should be able to charge a reasonable amount. But, you know, I mean, there are a couple of towns that is clearly unreasonable. I'm thinking of one that says the ordinance says you must follow all state laws, and here's your permit. And so they're not doing anything other than this follow all the state laws and here, give us $1,000. That's unreasonable. That's their ordinance, right? Just it's a money deal. So I don't know how you might be able to incorporate some kind of reasonableness into the requirements of an easement, of an ordinance. But I don't know how you would define that. But other than that, I think these other issues are, you know, the road issues are really a lot of between the contractor and the road commissioner in the town, to be honest with you. If you have a good relationship with the road commissioner, you can work it out. And, you know, and that's how it goes. But if you're dealing with the road commissioner with a different point of view, then it's difficult. But I think that changes frankly by who's the relationships there. So, and time of day, I mean, the only thing I would say is you don't want to just say no other, you know, ordinances that don't, no harvesting on weekends, holidays, you know, before 8 o'clock in the morning or after 4 o'clock at night. I don't know if you want to even get into that, because I don't think, but if ordinance starts showing up that way, I think it would be the Forest Service who would then come back and say, we're going to have to change this. We're going to have to add some statutory stuff in here because these aren't reasonable hours of operation. But I'm willing to let these issues all go for now.
Rebecca, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think that the language regarding how municipalities can impose fees is already in statute, and it has to be tied to an administrative activity. So I think that there already is that in law. Maybe it just needs to point to that, because unreasonableness is you know, defined within that scope. The time of day issues are a good neighbor thing. And that outreach and that connection are as much an important part of trying to alleviate a lot of the harassment issues. And again, that's the community that decides what they want. And you know what that's like when you bump up against someone that doesn't have that. Again, you get back to enforcement. That's also questionable. How do you deal with that? And the road issues are very, very nebulous, and they cross over into transportation as well. So I think basically just going back up and saying these are the issues that are also identified that require greater stakeholder review for and listening, just listening out, or not necessarily giving them any sort of priority or precedence, but just saying these are other issues. We know that they were brought up and they require greater stakeholder engagement, broader stakeholder engagement, I think.
Got it. Tom,
Done on the, if that's the fee issue, I think, yeah, if you could even, if there's already an ordinance or a regulation on defining reasonable fees, you could put that in one of the requirements or something that says, this any fees associated with this must meet this standard or something like that, so that it's a reminder of that requirement, because I understand that I'm sure there has to be some reasonable test about, you can't charge somebody $10,000 for a building permit. I mean, we can't do that. So maybe just a reminder in there that would take care of a couple of situations where the fees are unreasonable.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into, I think that's in 30A. I think I've seen that provision that Rebecca mentioned. Okay, last call on other issues. The agreement here is the list is okay, but I need to do some significant wordsmithing in the introductory couple of sentences. Tom?
Don, is it the Forest Service intention then to put this into a legislative language to give to the committee? It would seem to me that would be a real valuable thing. Otherwise, I'm assuming the committee will start building it, and it would seem to me it would be better that the Forest Service submit a draft as a draft language, and then theoretically we could all take a quick look at it, and it might make the process a little bit smoother, because I think there's general agreement on the recommendations in here. I think there's a general agreement, I think, that everybody involved in this would be supportive of these things. So is that your intention?
Patty?
So you look at the resolve and we are short on time with getting this resolve in December 15th. And we have to report the findings and recommendations of this group. So I don't think we'd have, I hear what you're saying, but I think in a broad sense, it's about presenting what everybody agreed on, and then working, it would be the legislator working forward with specific legislation.
So, Patty, are you anticipating though that the Forest Service would draft this? Amend this that consistent with the language that's here? Is that?
Yeah.
What I was trying to do is not just send this to the committee and then they'll look at each other and say, well, okay, now who's gonna draft this? And maybe then they say, well, the analyst works with the Forest Service. I would rather the Forest Service put together here's our draft, and even if you circulate it to all of us beforehand so we can see it, that might be helpful to get this thing. Because if you could then come back in and say, gee, we all looked at it and everybody's okay, if this thing will go pretty quickly.
Yeah. I'll take that under advisement, Tom.
All right. I don't think it has to be submitted with the actual report. I think it's
Right.
just, you can provide that at a,
Right.
when they review the report, you can say, and here's our attempt at language that would implement the recommendations in the report.
Right. Yeah.
Heather? You're on mute, Heather.
Sorry. Sorry. So thank you. I should have said earlier that I appreciate this. I know it represents a lot of work and that this is just one of many requests or directives from the ACF that you have to work on. I guess I just, I like the idea, what Tom was saying about having a bill to look at. And I guess, the timing of that, it creates extra work for you. Maybe it's something you could easily pull from this report. Whatever, I'm okay if it happens before the 15th or later. But I guess I just want to say that the because this is going to be on the official record, I just feel like the intro and the tone of it is different from what I heard from Representative O'Neill and what happened in the public hearing and the work sessions on this bill, which was pretty much a rejection of the original bill and a call for outreach and education and working with municipalities, not additional legislation. And I think that we've had great conversations, and I feel pretty good about where the specific recommendations are. But I don't want that to get lost. I don't want that sentiment and what actually happened to get lost, because I think what came out of the revisor's office with the amendment really bears very little resemblance to what was discussed and voted on in the last work session. So I just, to the extent that we can emphasize or even acknowledge that that's what happened, that this ALEC bill was rejected, and that there was a call for more education and outreach, that would feel really good.
Okay.
We can work on that, Heather.
So last bit is, does anybody have any comments on the intro part of this, which is pages 1 through 3? I'm going to assume that the appendixes are, since they are existing law, are okay.
Don, on the introduction, that is the entire resolve, right?
Yes, it is.
Because it says, it says doesn't it say to review and assess the law related to municipal proposals to adopt and amend timber harvesting ordinances. So that's
Correct.
the charge. The original bill is dead. That's gone. So, I mean, that's not even a consideration at this point. Our work is to do this, which is a very different situation. So I don't think you have to refer to anything previous and confuse issues. I think you were directed to do that line, and I think that report does this. I don't think anybody's going back to the original bill. So I'm happy. I mean, I think we're okay. Heather, I'm trying to understand your concern because that bill's dead. That's all. But I'm not disputing what you're thinking there, but I just wanted to understand it, because nobody's going back to argue that. They were saying, I'm only looking at what the resolve directed us to, well, not us, but all of us to get involved with. So.
Tom, I think I can and write something that doesn't necessarily go back, but it gets the sentiment of what Heather
Sure.
is saying.
Okay. I just don't want, I don't
Yeah.
want it to get confused and go start talking about a previous draft of a bill that is dead.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you.
Any last comments?
Just a clarification, Don.
Yeah.
Now I'm a little bit confused. Sorry, but this group, it was education and outreach, but it also could suggest legislation, correct? Wasn't that part of the resolve?
The committee is authorized to report out a bill
Okay.
resulting from the report.
Okay.
And
All
we
right,
know, in practice, when an agency submits a report to the legislature, the oversight committee will come back to the agency and say, can you draft a bill for this?
Nope. That's it. Thank you.
Rebecca.
I just want to say thank you for all the really hard work and the listening engagement that you've done on a continuous basis, and how you've been really diligent about getting things out in advance so that they can be reviewed. And it's just been a really great stakeholder session in terms of other ones. So well done. Not that I want to hang out on a regular basis in this type of process, but I just wanted to make sure that I thanked you and Patty and all the other stakeholders for really good engagement and really well thought out issues and solutions. I think everyone had really amazing contributions, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, but mostly to department staff for doing this big lift. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who participated, particularly those who came to all the meetings and did the homework. Really appreciate it. It's definitely made our work easier. Patty, do you want to?
Yes, well said. I really feel good about what came out of this. I think, like I said before, I think it's very well-rounded. There's a few tweaks to it, but it captures something really workable to go to the committee with, and we can certainly work on draft legislation to go forward with it.
So the deadline for reporting is December 15th. I will try to get a revision done. There's probably enough substance that I think it's worth circulating to you folks via email one more time, just for a real quick once over, and then we'll push it through. But your timeline's going to be very short. Okay. If there's no other comments, then, and I don't see anybody from the public present at the meeting, so we will end the meeting now. Early. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
So long. Bye.